The respiratory system is the system responsible for exchanging gases, and there are 5 functions of the respiratory system. The first function, and the primary function, is gas exchange, which involves the exchanging of oxygen and carbon dioxide. The second function is regulation of blood pH, which involves altering CO2 levels. The third function is olfaction, which involves the sense of smell. The fourth function is immunity. The non-specific defenses are hair and mucous membranes, and the specific defenses include the tonsils. And the fifth function is voice production. The general anatomy of the respiratory system include the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx, and the lungs, which include other air passageways and the alveoli. There are 2 divisions of the upper respiratory system. The upper respiratory tract, which includes the nasal cavity and the pharynx, and the lower respiratory tract, which includes the larynx, the trachea, and the lungs. The first structure of the upper respiratory tract is the nasal cavity. The external structure of the nasal cavity is the nose, which consists of the external nares, or nostrils. Also found within the nasal cavity are hairs, which help filter the air we breathe, mucous membranes, which line the nasal cavity and secrete a substance called mucus, which is a sticky substance that helps trap dirt and debris, tonsils, which help kill pathogens in the air we breathe, and the nasal concha, which helps warm the air that we breathe. Nasal concha work by creating turbulence in the air that we breathe. And turbulence is air particles, or are air particles colliding. When air particles collide, they generate heat, causing the air to warm up. Other structures surrounding the nasal cavity are the hard palate, which forms the bony roof of the mouth, and the soft palate, which forms the back part of the nasal cavity. Not pictured is the nasal septum, which divides the nasal cavity into right and left halves. The last part of the upper respiratory tract is the pharynx. The pharynx is the common passageway for air and food. It consists of 3 parts: the nasopharynx, which is the pharynx closest to the nasal cavity, the oropharynx, which is the part of the pharynx closest to the oral cavity, and the laryngopharynx, which is the part of the pharynx next to the larynx. The first structure of the lower respiratory tract is the larynx. This is the larynx from an anterior view. This is the larynx from a mid-sagittal view. The larynx is composed of several pieces of cartilage. The largest piece of cartilage that makes up the larynx is called the thyroid cartilage. On the thyroid cartilage is a structure called the laryngeal prominence, also known as Adam's apple. Another structure of the larynx is called the epiglottis. The epiglottis is a flap of cartilage that covers the larynx to prevent choking during swallowing. Within the larynx are structures that are involved with voice production. The opening is called the glottis. Surrounding the glottis are the true vocal cords, and surrounding the true vocal cords are the false vocal cords. The true vocal cords are called true because these are the structures that are involved with the production of sound. As air passes through the glottis, that air causes the true vocal cords to vibrate, causing sound. The false vocal cords are called false because they have no bearing in the production of sound. They're just supporting structures of the true vocal cords. After the larynx, the next structures of the lower respiratory tract are the bronchial tree. And the bronchial tree includes the trachea, the bronchi, the divisions of the bronchi ending in the bronchioles. The first structure of the bronchial tree is the trachea. The trachea consists of 20 C-shaped pieces of cartilage on the anterior side and smooth muscle on the posterior side. Looking at the trachea from a superior view, the cartilage is on the anterior side, smooth muscle is on the posterior side. And the reason why smooth muscle is located on the posterior side is because behind the trachea is a passageway for food called the esophagus. As food passes through the esophagus walls stretch and actually impede into the trachea, which is why the posterior side of the trachea has to be composed of smooth muscle for flexibility. After the trachea, the next part of the lower respiratory tract of the bronchial tree are the primary bronchi. After the primary bronchi are the secondary bronchi, followed by the tertiary bronchi. And the tertiary bronchi further subdivide into bronchioles. As air moves from the trachea down to the bronchioles, the composition of the passageway changes from cartilage, something that is rigid, to smooth muscle, to something that is less rigid. The reason why the composition of the bronchial tree changes from cartilage to smooth muscle is because smooth muscle has elastic properties which allows the lungs to expand and recoil. The lungs are the primary organs responsible for gas exchange. Within the lungs are the various passageways which we discussed in the previous slide, along with alveoli, which we will discuss next. As air moves through the different bronchi to the bronchioles, air finally reaches the last of the bronchioles, called the terminal bronchioles, before entering the alveolar ducts and into the alveoli. The walls of the alveoli consist of simple squamous epithelial tissue for the ease of diffusion of gases between the blood capillaries and the alveoli. Within the walls of the alveoli is a fluid, and that fluid can cause surface tension. Surface tension is a property of a fluid that causes two surfaces to stick together. To combat the surface tension of the fluids, a substance called surfactant is found within the alveoli. Surfactant reduces the surface tension of the fluid found within the alveoli. The lungs are located in the thoracic cavity and are surrounded by a serous membrane. The serous membrane surrounding the lungs is called the pleural membrane. The pleural membrane consists of 4 parts. The first part is called the parietal pleura. The parietal pleura is the outermost membrane that lines the thoracic cavity. The second part is the visceral pleura, which is the membrane that touches the lung itself. The third part is the pleural cavity, which is the space found between the parietal and visceral pleura. And the last part is pleural fluid, which is found within the pleural cavity. Pleural fluid reduces friction and acts as a shock absorber. Because pleural fluid is found between the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura, the two membranes are held together by surface tension. The surface tension between the two membranes will play an important role in ventilation.